This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. The good news is you're going to be hearing very, very little of me, and the bad news is you're going to be hearing a lot of Dominic McChesney and Robert Gordon in this episode, where they're going to be discussing the lost musicals of John Kander and Fred Ebb. So I'm going to hand you over to that discussion right now.
I'm sat here with Professor Robert Gordon. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, nice to meet you. This is the first time we've met, haven't we? We've both been on Musical Talk, but
yes,
we've never met before.
I've heard of you quite a lot from Nick,
Yes.
but we haven't met. So,
Hopefully it's all good, what Nick has said about both of us to each other.
I'm sure anything Nick says must be taken seriously.
Absolutely. And so we're gonna chat. I think we're just gonna see where we go. But I thought we'd start as a starting point because we both are great admirers of Kander and Ebb, and I mentioned that my favourite Kander and Ebb shows are probably the least known ones, and you're at the moment working on something, is that right?
Yes, I'm writing a book on Kander and Ebb, on the theatre of Kander and Ebb, because the only book in existence at the moment on Kander and Ebb is a collection of interviews with them,
yes.
But the only scholarly book that analyses Kander and Ebb is written by a musicologist, and that's very different. It's a different approach. So I'm trying to look at the way both the music and the book and lyrics in their work absolutely creates a kind of theatre.
Yes.
And the reason for this is I think that Kander and Ebb are second only to Sondheim in the American musical theatre of the golden age and up to the present.
Yes.
And I think they really, and of course there are about 12 books on Sondheim, so there should be at least 2 on Kander and Ebb.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think the thing that strikes me about Kander and Ebb, which I love, is, and I don't think people really realise this, how even though they have this very distinctive sound and quality, these shows change from one. If you set something like Zorba against 70 Girls 70, you can't have. They're so different, and it's just wonderful. And then Woman of the Year and things like that. So
I thought you were going to mention Zorba at that moment. Actually.
Oh right, yeah.
I thought immediately, as you said, they're very different from one to the other. I thought Zorba.
Yeah,
but quite right. If you compare Zorba with 70 Girls 70, you cannot believe they were written by the same team.
Yes.
And I think the interesting thing is everybody would listen to 70 Girls 70, and they would assume it had been written by Kander and Ebb or a team very like them. No one would think that Zorba was written by Kander and Ebb unless they were told.
Yes.
And yet, once you can see how brilliantly the pastiche in Zorba is managed. And just like Sondheim, but in a different way, I think Kander and Ebb are masters of pastiche.
Yes, indeed, yeah. But I mean, maybe we'll start with Zorba. Let's start with Zed and go backwards. So, but I discovered that, and then I'd seen the film when I was a lot younger, and I don't think it had made a great impression on me. I think I might have
probably
been too
depressed the hell out of it.
Well, yeah, I think I was too young to really understand a bit, And then I don't know the history of how they wrote it. But someone gave me a copy once, and I just fell in love with it. I mean, the songs, I think it's one of those shows where you listen to the first 5 or 6 songs, and every single one of them you go, this is fantastic. This is fantastic.
Each single one.
Every single one. There's not one that you're going to, I'm going to skip over that one. Whenever I listen to the cast recording, I always do listen to everything. There's not really a song that I skip. And it's a musicalisation of Zorba the Greek, it opened originally with...
it opened with Herschel Bernardi.
That's right.
And Maria Karnilova.
Yes.
And there's a story about this, and it's maybe one of the reasons, although it was a moderate hit, why it wasn't a huge hit to begin with. Herschel Bernardi and Maria Karnilova had just closed in Fiddler on the Roof. And everybody went to it expecting this to be the next Fiddler on the Roof, and I think they thought, it's a sort of minor Fiddler on the Roof.
Right.
And of course Zorba is actually a much bleaker show than Fiddler on the Roof. I mean, there are bleak moments in Fiddler,
yes,
but Zorba is incredibly bleak.
Yes.
That may be another reason why it didn't totally succeed on Broadway. But
then when Anthony Quinn, who of course was the original Zorba in the film, he then took over. So it became almost like Topol became Tevye.
Absolutely.
Anthony Quinn became Zorba for the every production and touring production
and
after
there's
that.
very funny stories. And then that made it into a huge hit all over America and in New York.
Yes.
But it ran for far longer in the revival.
Yeah.
But that was in the 80s, I think.
Yes.
But the funny thing about that, because I read what Kander and Ebb say in their book, Coloured Lights, and they say that Anthony Quinn couldn't dance at all because, of course, in the film, the feet are replaced by a proper dancer, so that whenever you see him really dancing in those marvellous bouzouki and situations, Anthony Quinn, it's not Anthony Quinn, but by the time he'd come to do the musical,
yes,
because he'd been Zorba, and everybody saw Anthony Quinn by that time as a star as Zorba, he began to believe that he could dance. This is according to Kander and Ebb, and he started to do this, and they said he couldn't keep time, he couldn't hear the music, he couldn't do anything, except no one could tell him, because he was absolutely convinced that he was Zorba, and Zorba was a great dancer. So the choreographer had a nightmarish time trying to create choreography for someone who couldn't dance, who was supposed to, as a character, be a good folk dancer.
It's but in some ways that does kind of tie in with Zorba though, because it's all his bluster and self-confidence, isn't it?
Perhaps they played it that way.
Maybe
he didn't know.
That's brilliant. That's wonderful.
So no, I agree with you. I think the score of Zorba is one of the greatest American musical theatre scores, no question. I have problems with the book, and I'll tell you, I've tested this because I keep wanting to love this show and to hail it as one of the greatest shows in musical theatre history. But I saw it in an Encores performance in New York.
I was going to say it was done by Encores recently, wasn't it?
With a very bizarre cast. Some of them, Marlon Mazzy as the chorus, very, very good, quite the right choice.
Yeah.
But they used
Zoe Wanamaker as
she was very good as in the Lila Kadrova part.
Yes.
But I think they used John Turturro. I think it was John Turturro playing
That's
Zorba.
right. Yes.
And one of the things about Zorba is he must be able to sing a bit, and
Yes.
John Turturro can't sing at all.
Oh dear.
And that made it very odd. And you wondered, and also he wasn't he's a wonderful actor, John Turturro, but he didn't have this kind of naive, crude and vulgar zest for life that Zorba is supposed to have.
Yes.
He was too refined. And so it didn't quite work. But then what a friend always says to me, well, how can you really make a Broadway musical out of a show that starts with the lines, life is what you do while you're waiting to die? It's one of the reasons they actually changed that line for the original production, because they made it not waiting to die, something else. I can't remember exactly, but it is rather off-putting for a middle-aged or elderly Broadway audience.
Oh, I see. Yes, do you know, that never occurred to me, but that's very true.
But of course, also
I always
when
think it's a wonderful line, but of course, it's a wonderful line to someone who's
30.
Not really, yes.
And also, when you see it on stage, you realise what an awful. I don't mean awful in a negative sense of criticism, but what a shocking story it is. Because after all, the young guy, falls in love with a woman who then gets murdered in a revenge killing, and most of the second half is about her dying, and then the secondary lead woman dies of cancer anyway, and so that both the love stories are completely thwarted, and it is really a real tragedy.
Yes.
So much as when you appreciate that when you listen to the score, it's horrifying on stage, I think, and an audience has to be quite tough to take that. It's a little bit like watching a genuine Greek tragedy.
Yes. But that's interesting, because I've actually never seen it on stage. I know the film, so I know the story, and I know the cast recording, and from listening to it, I will be carried along and fill in the blanks of where the story is. But it's
it comes across as darker in this version, because I think partly because they went back to the novel and used some of the stuff from the novel, but also because they had to condense the story, obviously.
Yes.
all the events on stage, very few of them are joyous, except occasionally in song.
Yes.
They're all leading you inevitably to a tragedy. Whereas in the film, I remember with Alan Bates, when Alan Bates was really the coming young star,
Yes.
British star, it was more about his repression as a sort of English person.
Yes, and learning and getting over
Yes.
it and blossoming and
Yes.
learning from Zorba.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so the other the love stories were supplementary,
Yes.
in a way to the main story. But I think inevitably on stage you can't not. But I must say, Zoe Wanamaker was actually superb.
Well, the little clips I've seen of it,
yeah.
it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And it is strange. I mean, it ties in with Kander and Ebb because they do have this. They do go for a lot of dark qualities in their musicals, don't they? I mean, saying that, I mean, it'd be interesting to know, because a lot of these shows I do know from the cast recording, not from seeing them or from reading the book. So we'll kind of slip to another one now, just to see the contrast. But let's go from the contrast of that to let's go to we'll go to 70 Girls 70 because
Almost the complete opposite.
it is the complete opposite. Now that obviously didn't do particularly well in the original production, I heard, because somebody said it was too big. They did it too realistic and too big. And 70 Girls 70 is based on a play, isn't it, called
I don't remember that one, but I know
it's based on a play called
oh yes, I have heard of it.
and it's about a group of old people in a retirement home.
It's a sort of actors' retirement home.
That's
isn't it?
right, and they decide to. I think, are they trying to raise money to save it, or are they just getting a zest for life? They decide to go.
They
on
rob
a
a shop.
of
a department
furs,
store.
a department store, and the original cast, Breath of Spring, and the original that was Nick Hudson, ladies and gentlemen, Breath of Nick Hudson. It was the original cast was quite incredible. I think Mildred Nantwick and Hans Conried, who I think died during it
on stage,
which is totally sad. But if you listen to the score of that, it's got a very 70s feel, hasn't it? Or 70s or 80s.
It's also got a very Kander and Ebb feel. I mean,
Yes.
it sounds like all the material they wrote for Liza Minnelli rolled into one. And she actually
Yes.
used one of the main songs in a
Yes.
concert, in concerts a few times, the one called Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Yes, I will. Yes, I'd love to do such and such, you see. And it is a lovely Liza Minnelli song because it's all, being positive. But of course, you lack the irony of having a really old person sing it.
Yes.
And yes, you're right. It's very 70s, but even more, I think it's totally showbiz. It's vaudeville. I mean, the interesting thing, this is a funny. I suppose I'm also partly working on Follies at the moment, so it's in my mind. But at exactly the same time, because they opened within a month of each other, Follies and 70 Girls 70 are both set in vaudeville situations. Follies is about sort of Ziegfeld Follies reviews or uses, so it pastiches vaudeville, and the whole of 70 Girls 70 is staged as a kind of vaudeville.
Yes.
Because these old people, they rob the shop, but they present the story to the audience as though it were vaudeville.
Yes.
And so it was one of those strange moments in the zeitgeist when, of course, Follies became a huge, up to a point, critical success, because there were people who hated it.
Yeah.
But 70 Girls 70 was slightly patronised by the critics and was a flop. It didn't run very long.
Yeah.
But actually, they're both brilliant pastiche scores about vaudeville. And I think it's Fred Ebb who actually relates that on a matinee on Saturday, soon after both shows had already opened, Sondheim was in the audience and he came up to Fred Ebb and said, "This is the best pure entertainment show I've ever seen." And I mean, that's a great compliment from Sondheim, isn't it?
That's fantastic. Now, of course, it did come to London eventually with Dora Bryan, and I think they scaled it down and they did it so the musicians were on stage.
I think they did it at the Vaudeville smaller
That's right,
theatre.
and it was very, very much more intimate, and it was actually done as a review. Oh, this is what happened to us in the past. So,
I saw that, and it was absolutely charming. I mean,
yes.
it wasn't the greatest musical you've ever seen. It didn't have the depth of something like Zorba or Kiss of the Spider Woman, but it was utterly charming. And of course, I think in Britain, I this is a prejudice of mine perhaps, but I think our performers, especially older performers, have a way of playing camp I mean, I don't mean.
Yes, I know
There's
what you
nothing
mean.
gay
Yeah.
about it, but
Yeah.
but Dora Bryan is entirely camp. Everybody
Yes,
knows she had
yes.
this wonderful career in revue. She took over from Mary Martin in London as in Hello Dolly as Dolly. You know, so she is an experienced musical theatre performer without a big voice. But
Yes.
she can get through a song well.
Yeah.
And in her slightly camp, little voice, she I mean, when she sings Yes, it's both got pathos and comedy, but also they were hilarious. And from what I've read, I suspect that no matter how starry the cast were on Broadway, they were taking the material a bit too seriously. Whereas in London, they had the kind of camp that tongue-in-cheek quality that you would expect Kander and Ebb to be writing.
Yes, I know what you mean. It's that ensemble bouncing off each other.
Yes.
Just that slight twinkle in their eye with the comedy,
Yes.
that knowing,
Yes.
bring down the fourth wall sort
Exactly.
of thing. So,
And nobody was trying to prove how good they still were as an old
Yeah.
performer, because in a sense they'd gone beyond that. They
Yes.
could say we're funny, and
whereas
that's
on
why
Broadway they're proving we still got it.
we've still got
We've
it.
still got it.
Exactly.
Whereas in England it's like, oh yeah, we've
we
been
had
there.
it. We're way past that.
Yeah,
and,
we
you know,
don't need to effort.
But aren't we funny? Of course,
Yes.
the audience adored them for that
Yes.
reason.
Oh, excellent. Oh, that's good. I wish I'd seen it. I really wish I'd seen it.
Well, I must say, if I can skip on myself about
Yeah.
my own experiences, I think I'm the only person, not only did I see that, but at least quite a few people, I think, saw 70 Girls, 70, but I must be one of the 2,000 people in the entire world that saw a musical that is now no longer licensed. They're not allowed to do anything with it because it was Kander and Ebb's version of Thornton Wilder's
Skin of Our Teeth.
other play, yes, Skin of Our Teeth, not Our Town, but Skin of Our
Yes.
Teeth, which is a very interesting choice for a musical because it's almost like a musical itself, the way
Yes.
it's written. It's so fantastical. And I saw it, believe it or not, just out of town in Connecticut, in a small theatre. But wait for this, I think it was one of the last things Eartha Kitt ever did. And Eartha Kitt, she only had a smaller role, but she had a song, and she was absolutely amazing. And I'll never forget this. She slowly curled herself up so that she bended at the waist right down to the ground, and I thought, for an 80-year-old woman, that's star quality. But of course it was quite, she quite deliberately did it. I don't think it had anything really to do. She played a fortune teller,
Right.
so it was appropriate for the character, but it wasn't. It was Eartha Kitt.
Yes.
But actually it had Sheila Hensley playing the main part.
Yes.
And it had a lot of good performers, and I'm sure they were looking to improve it and then take it to Broadway. It has some wonderful songs in it.
I do have it. I have
yeah,
I have a
Bootleg.
I have a bootleg recording. And it's and I know the play very slightly because
Yes.
it's a very
Yes.
very strange
Yes.
play, isn't it? Because
Yes.
it's Thornton Wilder's over, of course, wrote Our Town
Yes,
and
yes.
The Matchmaker,
Yes,
which was
became Dolly.
Hello Dolly. But it starts off in the Ice Age, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So, and
it's kind of the history of the world as a cartoon strip.
seen through the eyes of one family.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think, so you think all the time, this is an ideal subject for a musical, and Kander and Ebb are the ideal team to write it, but I think it's let down by the book. I think when he wrote it, Joseph Stein, who I think was the original book writer for Cabaret.
Yeah.
Master. I'm thinking of Stein. No, Stein, who I think is the original book writer for Fiddler.
Right. Okay. Yes.
But he was over 90 when he was writing this.
Oh, gosh,
And I
okay.
think it shows. I don't think it has the kind of freshness
Yes.
as a book, and it relies a bit heavily maybe on the original, and it doesn't tap into quite to the surreal quality, because I've actually seen the play again on stage at the Young Vic, done in a very surreal way, and it's still not my favourite play, but it was delightful.
Yes.
And I think, well, why couldn't they capture that in the musical?
I only know they did a TV version with Vivian Leigh playing the maid.
Yes.
I've forgotten her name.
Sabina.
Sabina.
Yeah.
And of course it has dinosaurs in the first
Yes,
scene,
yes,
doesn't
yes,
it? I mean,
yes.
it's very bizarre.
Well,
So
dancing dinosaurs?
dancing dinosaurs, indeed. So, but you said that it's not allowed to be done anymore.
Yes, what happened was, and I think it's a very stupid decision, when the estate of Thornton Wilder saw that it was a bit of a flop,
Yeah.
they withdrew permission for them ever to do it again. And I think that was a terrible mistake, because what Kander and Ebb, and Kander now has done since Ebb died, is they have revisited a number of their shows, and he has got people to rewrite with him,
Yes.
and they have got better and better. And I think we would never have had, which I think is possibly their masterpiece, actually. We would never have had the Scottsboro Boys unless Kander had done that.
Yes.
It was almost entirely written by the time Ebb died, but it needed some work, and it got the work because Kander insisted on it. Now, he can't do that with what's now called Over and Over, or All Over, I think it's because the estate have withdrawn permission. And I think actually no one's ever going to seriously mount a lavish, large-scale commercial production with the skin of our teeth. So why not let him have a go?
It's a period piece now.
Exactly,
I mean, it really is. It's a time of, it's
exactly.
Yeah,
it's theatre history.
That's such a shame. Things
not
have
like,
to evolve.
Yeah.
Things do have to evolve.
And it's not like Our Town. It hasn't become a classic.
No.
So,
Yes, it's the lesser known.
But actually, this could make it famous again.
Yes,
if
absolutely.
If they got it right.
Yes, that is a shame. So, well, that's interesting to go with that. So let's talk.
So I think I'm one of the very few people. That's my claim to fame, is that I'm one of the only people who ever saw their version of Skin of Our Teeth.
So and yeah, because I was going to mention it because I've got the bootleg and I listened to it, and I do need to revisit it and listen to it again. So I can't remember who gave that to me. I'm sure I'm not meant to have it.
Can I throw in another one, which I think is also an oddity, and sadly that it failed on Broadway recently, The Visit, starring Chita Rivera in her 400th reincarnation. Chita Rivera, she was brilliant in it, I must say, and I've seen it twice. Once when it was heading for Broadway, or they were trying to head for Broadway, at Williamstown Festival, and then again on Broadway, and I think it was about to close about 3 weeks later.
Yes.
And I think, again, this is a flawed masterpiece.
Yes.
I think, as far as I can judge musically, and I'm not a musician. I'm not a magician either, but I'd like to be. But I felt that the music was, in a way, much more complex than what Kander had written before. I mean, in the sense that it was almost, the way it's orchestrated, you almost feel this is symphonic in the way that some of Sondheim's later shows are. Do you mean with the changes from the original time you first saw it, or no, do you mean actually both times?
But actually, his development as a composer.
Yes. I blame, and I think it doesn't quite work. The book doesn't work.
Okay.
The score is brilliant, but not always popular. I mean, there are a few big popular Kander and Ebb numbers in there, but there are other numbers which are closer to contemporary opera or something like that. I mean, they're not quite as, they're not absurdist or bizarre, but they're not pop hits. They're more like some of Sondheim, some of the stuff in Into the Woods, in between the big numbers, where Sondheim is playing around with key changes and dissonances and things like that, that you feel this is genuinely conceived. It's a very dark play.
Yes.
And it's genuinely conceived as a very dark musical. They make very few concessions to popular Broadway entertainment. And the sad thing is, and I have this, maybe again it's a prejudice, I think that John Doyle did something like what he did on Roadshow, which is he messed up a potentially great work by saying, because I think John Doyle's got a habit as a director, he's the go-to director when any one of your shows has flopped. And I think what John Doyle does when he gets a flop is he cuts all the material he doesn't like, pares it down to the bone, and makes it look a little bit more like a review, so you don't have to have much book. So you get an outline, but what you don't get either with his Sondheim Roadshow or with his production of The Visit, in my view, you don't get enough juice. You don't get enough, Kander and Ebb work because there's vulgarity there very often, because there's show business there. And what you feel is John Doyle is a very ascetic director, and he gives you the bones of the theme, but then you end up feeling preached at. And I think, from what I know about both shows, because of course Roadshow has a long history, it was called Bounce, it was called Gold, before that it was called something else. And I think when Hal Prince did it as Bounce, I've seen bits of it on TV, you got much more real tension between the popular sort of vulgarity of some of the numbers, make it a musical, and then the starkness of the theme. What you get in Roadshow is the starkness of the theme and nothing else. And quite frankly, it's a bit boring.
Right.
And I think something perhaps worse went on with The Visit, because all the things that I've seen in the production, which I think Frank Galati did in Chicago first, of The Visit, and then was done in Washington, D.C., I think by Eric Schaefer, maybe in Galati again, but I think all of those bits are missing.
That's interesting, because I got the cast recording of the Chita Rivera one, and I've also got the bootleg of the songs, and I was like, where are these songs? And this wonderful song, You Know Me, between the two women, and they're talking, and it's pure Kander and Ebb. They're being, and it's a brilliant comedy number where they're saying, you know me, I'd never speak a word about someone, but she's an absolute bitch. And it's just so nasty, and it's beautiful. And then there's another song where she lists her husbands, and I don't know whether that was in the Cheetah. No, that's not. And so I was really disappointed to hear that those two songs that actually made the biggest input to me, and maybe because I always go for the musical comedy, but I love that when you can get that nastiness but with a nice tune.
But you see what's so brilliant about Kander and Ebb, and I think it's absolutely key to what they do, is this conjunction between showbiz vulgarity and deep seriousness,
which is the whole point of cabaret, isn't it? I mean, it's the absolute essence of it.
How do you make a musical out of the Holocaust?
Yes.
You can't, so you do cabaret. So the Holocaust is off stage, but we, the audience, bring all our collective memory of the horror of what happened after the cabaret actually happens in history. It's after 1931 that all these things happen, but you bring it in to cabaret because they are evoking it atmospherically.
Yes.
And that is what is so brilliant about them. And I think that here you had an opportunity to contrast. They were obviously writing these deliberately vulgar songs, ironically.
Yes.
They do it all the way through Kiss of the Spider Woman. They write songs about people, people being tortured with a laugh, with a smile, with an ironic, to make you feel very powerfully the irony between your desire as an audience member to be entertained in a Broadway theatre and the reality that cannot be contained in a Broadway musical, which is the horror of the dictatorship in Latin American country at that point, and the homophobia and the political repression. If you only got the play about political repression and homophobia, it would be completely didactic and boring.
Yes.
But together with Kander and Ebb's juicy and funny and witty pastiche songs, you get something, I think that again is close to a masterpiece. But I think The Visit could be a masterpiece if it was better edited. Obviously, none of the versions really worked, but I think with much better editing and much more inclusion of the real meat of Kander and Ebb, it would be a much better show than it is now.
Well, now that it's actually been on, hopefully there is some sort of chance that it may, and I'm sure in some time in the future it may appear somewhere in London, maybe at the other place or something.
Or the Young Vic. I mean, the Young Vic did saved, in a way, the Scottsboro Boys, because by having it at a subsidised theatre in London, and it became a huge prestige hit.
Yes.
It didn't make money. I mean, it transferred to the West End, but it didn't make money. But it got an Olivier Award for Best Musical, and I think that has saved the reputation of that show, because it certainly didn't get an Olivier. It didn't get a Tony, and I think Broadway audiences were simply scared of it because it's about American racism.
Yes.
Okay, Brits can say, well, that's American racism.
Yes, we can hold it.
We have our own, but ours is so much more polite.
Yeah, yes.
Terribly sorry.
Yeah, terribly sorry. No, that's very true. No, it's very true. Well, hopefully the something will happen, and The Visit will see British light.
I'm sure eventually someone's going to do The Visit here.
Yeah.
I just hope they get the right to go back to earlier versions and include some of those songs that
Yes, indeed. And I think so. Well, maybe they...
Nice Farts Ed did it.
Yes. Well, that would be a start, because I think people would pick it up if they saw it at Art Sid.
Yes.
But you see, I think a lot of people, probably Brits, didn't even see it, because you happen to... You would have needed to be in New York at the time, and it only ran about 6 weeks. And poor old Roger...
It was the last thing Roger Rees
died,
did, yes.
and it was very sad, because I actually remember in the 6 months between seeing him in it with Rivera in Williamstown, and then when saw it happened to be in New York, saw it about 8 months later, I think. I said to a friend I was with in the theatre, I said to him, why is Roger Rees so bad? He was quite good when we saw it before. Obviously, we didn't realise he was dying. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Now, yes, because and now originally Angela Lansbury was linked to it, wasn't it?
I'm glad in a way she didn't do it in the end, because much as
it's a little bit of an obvious
yes,
choice.
and also,
even though I adore her,
I adore Angela Lansbury, but the thing about Angela Lansbury is, again, she brings something of the high art status with her. Although she's a great Broadway musical star, she does, they go to her because they think Angela can do it because she's a serious actress. But what was interesting in seeing Cheetah, who's a real Broadway hoofer doing it, is you realise what a brilliant actress she is.
Oh, she's fantastic. And one of those people who, it's like spreading butter on a piece of bread, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Her performance is just
And the interesting
so
thing
beautiful.
is the voice wasn't quite there as it used to be, but it didn't matter because
it doesn't matter with Claire, though, does it?
no, she sang so artfully. She's playing an 80-year-old woman anyway.
Yeah.
She was about 80 when she did it, and everything was there that needed to be there. The drama in the voice was unbelievable, and so you were riveted.
Yes. I've got my brain suddenly went off on a really weird tangent then, because you mentioned her being 80, and I was thinking about older actresses and actors, performing in, and I suddenly went, isn't it time for a full star-studded version of Valmouth?
Wouldn't that be fun?
Wouldn't that be great, with a huge, wonderful star-studded
Yes,
of all these
yes.
octogenarian actors and actresses?
I think in a funny kind of way, it's the only way. It's a very brilliant idea, actually, Dom, because I think it's the only way you could probably sell a show like that if you had some legendary people who are no longer really working every week in theatre, and who therefore might do it for a smaller fee.
Yeah.
Because it'll bring an audience, you see.
Yes.
And if you had the equivalence of Dora Bryan, when Dora Bryan did it, she must have been about 70 when she did 70 Girls 70. Actually.
Yes.
But if you had people of that age who can still do it, doing Valmouth, you see, I think you'd get a real audience, and of course that's a hilarious show.
Yes,
isn't it?
I mean, it's due for a revival, I've always thought.
Yes,
so.
yes.
Anyway, let's go back to Kander and Ebb. So I want to talk about my favourite Kander and Ebb, which is weird, and that is actually Woman of the Year. I actually I adore the score for Woman of the Year. And
I'm not allowed to say that I do, but I do. Because it's one of those shows I've been told.
It's very commercial, even though
absolutely.
it's disappeared.
And I've been told by my best friend that I am completely out of my mind to adore Jerry Herman's Mame. But I adore Woman of the Year for the same reasons as I adore Jerry Herman's Mame. It's a real old-fashioned, lavish song and dance Broadway score.
Yes, with a huge full chorus.
Absolutely.
And animation, bizarrely enough.
Now, this one I've never seen, although I have seen the film.
Oh, yes, no, I've seen the film, and I watched the film to try and get some input, and they obviously changed things, because in the film, it's Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, and he's a sports writer.
Yes.
In the musical, Sam Craig, who is... he's a cartoonist for the Funny Papers, and she is a serious journalist on TV, and she criticizes cartoons. So he creates a version of her in his Sunday morning paper cartoon strip, and they have this huge argument or political this argument off without meeting, and then they meet, and it's love at first sight, and then they get married, and it all spirals out of control from there. The score is fantastic. I mean, it has,
if you like Broadway show tunes.
But it's also got that wonderful it does
duet, the comic duet,
which of course made it didn't make a star of her. She was already a star.
She had 15 minutes of fame.
It is a duet where this one person who appears in the second act, and she walks away almost with the entire show, doesn't she, in her pocket?
Yes.
And it's the two women singing "The Grass Is Always Greener," which is just probably one of the funniest duets for being deadpan. Completely.
It's also
deadpan.
one of the sort of it's a trademark type song, because there's a song like that in The Rink. The apple doesn't fall very far from the tree.
Yes.
This is probably a much funnier song, but it's tended to be funny.
Yes.
Yes, and it was a huge vehicle for Lauren Bacall, of course, who'd made such a huge success a few years earlier in All About Eve, in Applause. In a way, I think this is a better score than Applause.
Yeah.
Because it's Kander and Ebb.
I think Applause, if you listen to it now, Applause does sound dated.
It does sound dated.
Even though I love it. Yeah. But whereas Woman of the Year, it actually doesn't sound dated, I think.
And also today, who needs a musical version of All About Eve when we've got the film.
Yes.
It was great for Lauren Bacall as a vehicle at the time, and it turned her into a musical theatre star in such an unlikely way. Here's a woman who can't really sing at all, but she learnt to belt and put across a number in such a way that she seems like the most confident musical performer, of all time.
Yes.
But actually, literally, I mean, if you look at it technically, she's not even hitting really a proper note. They're all just belting.
No, and they're almost wonderfully flat.
Absolutely, absolutely. But you're riveted because the drama in the voice as well.
Yes.
But I think that she's better in Woman of the Year because she's obviously more confident by that time.
Yes, and there was the dance routines. There was a lot of it on YouTube, and so you can see some of the dance routines. But again, it's one of those ones that I think I just find every song is just a great, and it has these wonderful chorus numbers, and it probably one of my favourite chorus numbers of a musical, which is "It Isn't Working," which is one of those numbers that it's a gossip song, so it's all the different people in the life, aren't they? They're talking about how the marriage isn't working. I assume it might be the Act 2 opener. And it builds and builds with all the different characters that you've met throughout the story until everybody's singing. And it really is one of those chorus numbers that I think goes down in my little chorus number history, like She's a Nut from on the 20th century, because it's just a build song until it's actually it becomes this fantastic number.
I wonder, that was never done in London, unlike Applause, which was done with Bacall soon after it opened on Broadway. I wonder if it's because, again, that was actually one of their bigger commercial hits.
Oh, was it?
Woman of the Year, because of Bacall.
And it seems to have disappeared.
Yeah, it's disappeared. And I wonder if it didn't come because possibly Bacall was getting older then and she didn't want to bother to come to London to do it again.
Yes.
But I wonder, she'd already run more than a year, or quite a few. It had run for a year, and then I think Raquel Welch took over.
Yes, that's right.
And actually, I think Raquel Welch did it quite well, apparently.
The clip of her doing... Oh, no, I've actually seen Lauren Bacall doing Grass is Always Greener, but I've actually seen Raquel Welch. She did it on something like the Tonys or something. They did a clip, but they actually have her singing.
But you see, I sorry.
Oh no! Would you be able? Can you just look up who was the actress who sang that?
The grass is always greener.
It's Marilyn someone.
Yeah, Marilyn someone.
And
but you see, I think the interesting thing, I think people possibly felt at the time that who could replace Bacall in it?
Right.
So, and they began to see it as a vehicle for Bacall,
yes,
because she'd been a huge success in it. So they didn't want to do it in London unless Bacall came.
Right. And so that's when, it's Marilyn Cooper. Marilyn Cooper.
And she got a Tony for
She
Best
did.
Supporting.
She did. And she's incredible. I mean, it's a textbook example if you actually watch her and Bacall do it. I mean, it's almost, you can almost feel the frostiness of the fact that she's stealing this entire scene from Bacall from singing this song, and she doesn't move. She just sits on the stool holding a glass of milk and completely steals
I
the show.
have seen it once, not with either of those women, but with Barbara Cook at the Albert Hall and Elaine Stritch. Well, you can imagine what that was like. I mean, it was terrifying.
Oh my God, who was who? I mean,
I think that Barbara Cook played the Bacall part,
right? Yes,
and of course Stritch played the other.
That's
the other parts gets all the laughs.
Brilliant.
She allowed Stritch,
yes,
and they actually did it because they obviously couldn't remember all the lines. I mean, they were both by that time in their 80s, and they did it with all the sheet music, and it opened out so that by the end of the number, the sheet music was all over the stage.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Which is funny in itself.
Yes.
Apart from,
that's very funny.
It's a number you can't fail with.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's the first time I'd ever heard. That was the first number I heard from the show. And of course, it also had Roderick Cook in it, who's kind of a forgotten person now. And Roderick Cook was he was an English actor who became very well known on Broadway, and right, he was in The Girl Who Came to Supper, which is Noel Coward's version of
Sleeping Princess.
That's right.
Sleeping Prince.
That's right. And he made a name for himself for playing very British characters on Broadway.
But then, of course, it co-starred Harry Guardino, who had been the original Hapgood in
Anyone Can Whistle.
Anyone Can Whistle.
Yes, so that
was interesting.
So he obviously wasn't a musical theatre star before.
No, he had done Anyone Can Whistle. So obviously,
yes,
he does have the sort of vocal chops, but he isn't thought of as a musical theatre performer.
And he's got a wonderful quality to the sound. I mean, the sound of his voice. Yes. Now, it's a very American story, isn't it?
Yes, of
but
course.
I think Americana always seems to do better in England than English stuff does better on Broadway. We kind of, I think we often accept. We don't necessarily. I mean, I know they do change things for English audiences, but we tend to accept things and don't need so much change when it goes the other way.
You're riffing on a theme that's very dear to me, and this is great because I've got this theory. I mean, I think Guys and Dolls is probably the greatest musical comedy ever written.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of people would agree. But it's kind of more popular in Britain than in America. I mean, it's popular in America, but I think you can revive it anytime in any Western theatre, and put some decent people in it, and it will always get a huge audience.
Yes,
I mean, it's been revived about 3 times in the last 10 years.
Yeah,
and each run has been at least 6 months and packed,
Yes,
and rave reviews. And I think the reason for that is ever since Oklahoma and Annie Get Your Gun sort of conquered the West End after the war, in the late 40s. I think that the Brits have started to look at American musicals as a part of specifically American culture. So we don't just see them as Blade Runner, which is kind of universal because whether you like it or not, it's popular culture.
Yes.
But we see American musicals as particularly American.
Yes.
We see them as New Yorkish. We listen to the accents as a special. We laugh at the Damon Runyon kind of Brooklynese accent.
Yeah.
And that's why I think I've got this theory that you see Americans look at British musicals as though we are trying to write American musicals, and they always see them therefore as flawed American musicals.
I see. Yes, that's very
But
interesting.
they also, and this is without doubt the case, that in fact many of the writers of a lot of the books are on musical theatre, on Broadway musical theatre, actually say that Andrew Lloyd Webber is a Broadway composer. I mean, I find that grotesque because it totally ignores the cultural roots of someone like Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Yes.
And okay, Elton John may be a Broadway writer when he writes for Disney or a California writer, but actually he's also British, and there's a different tone in his lyrics to what an American writer would give.
Yes.
But I mean, if you think that the person who wrote Cats, I mean, I've actually read this in a scholarly book that Andrew Lloyd Webber has used London as a tryout venue for his Broadway shows, which I found insulting, unhistorical, and actually quite wrong.
Yes.
But that is the way, you see, Americans see they see the musical as the American musical. We see American musicals as something special, and we love them.
Yes.
Which is why Mormon is such a huge success.
Yes.
Because again, it's a witty American musical, and the Brits love wit.
Yes.
They don't always like musicals to take themselves too seriously.
Yes.
But we see it as an American musical. They see Oliver as a failed attempt to write My Fair Lady.
I see.
That's my view.
That's very interesting. Yes.
And they say, well, it's not as well integrated as My Fair Lady. Well, of course not, love, because it's actually based on music hall. It's not based on very carefully,
Because there was, I mean, one of my passions is the English musical, and I'm thinking of the shows, the Wolf Mankiewicz musicals, like
Make
Me an Offer, or Espresso Bongo.
Well, that needs a revival.
So Espresso Bongo. It actually doesn't need to be corrected. I actually called it Espresso Bongo, and it's not Espresso Bongo. Yes. Well, they tried to find it. I had a composer who tried to get the score together for Guildford. But they couldn't put the score. They couldn't find the book.
Really?
No, they tried everywhere and they couldn't get it together. So now I did interview Millicent Martin for Musical Talk many years back, and she was telling me about her experiences on it. And I didn't ask her whether she still has the copy of the score of the book, which I should have done.
Can we go back to Kander and Ebb?
Yes, let's do it.
This is another conversation which if Nick has enough time for
we could do it another time.
We do another time because it's another obsession about mine.
Yes,
of mine is about British musicals.
Oh, let's do another one on British musicals. Absolutely.
But you see, something like Curtains. Now, I saw Curtains once in New York and absolutely loved it. And it's pure musical comedy. It's a detective story. Somebody gets murdered on stage in a show, and she's a star, but she's an appalling actress, and everybody hates her anyway.
Yes.
So they're actually rather thrilled, but they all think the show's going to close, and the producer insists that the understudy's going to go on, and it's going to go on, and it's absolutely brilliant pastiche detective thriller musical comedy.
Yes.
And it's got all the hallmarks of all the great Kander and Ebb shows. It's got pastiche, it's got brilliant show business writing, it's about show business, it's funny. I then thought, well, maybe it's because I saw this brilliant cast on Broadway, and came back to London about a year later. Arts Ed did it.
Yes.
And it was just as brilliant. I mean, okay, Arts Ed kids are talented.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there was a group of 20-year-olds in this show that sort of needs older actors. And the shows... And then I saw it at the what used to be...
The Landor.
The Landor.
Yes.
And I thought it was brilliant there too. And I thought, there's something about the writing of the show that's good. It can't
So
be...
it really is the show you think
It's
is
the
a
show.
fantastic
It's
show.
the show, yes.
And it also had Rupert Holmes, of course, who wrote Edwin Drood.
Absolutely.
So, and he's a mystery writer as well. So,
Absolutely.
and it is probably one of the only times where a good murder mystery has actually worked as a musical comedy.
Absolutely. I think
because it's very
probably,
difficult to do.
Yeah, I think it's probably the only one that's run for more than 6 months. I think it ran about
Yes.
2.5 years. And that is it's a great show. I think producers are nuts. London producers are nuts not to do it in the West End.
Yes.
Because that's a show that would
Yeah.
any kind of audience, even the coach party audience, whatever, they would love that show because it's so part
If they
of...
cast it right, they would
Absolutely.
absolutely have people eating it up. And it absolutely should.
If you had, say, for example, Sheridan Smith in one role, even in a smaller role, in that, it would pack out for a whole year. It would be sold out for a year.
Yeah.
I mean, having said
Well,
that,
I've done the Edward Hibbard role of the
Yes,
producer
yes.
is one of my dream casting roles.
we'll
So
cast
this-
We'll
Please. Thank you
cast
very
you.
much. That'd be late.
but I think that it's a no-brainer.
Yes.
But no, I mean, if you think that Funny Girl, which I think has got a wonderful score, but is an appallingly written book,
Yes.
that could run just because of Sheridan Smith in a very bad production. I'm not saying that the production was bad when it was at the Menier, but I saw it in the West End, and it was totally underpopulated. The sets were too small, that there weren't enough actors on stage. It felt thin, and you thought, when you see it without a big production,
Yeah.
what you get is Sheridan Smith and not much else.
Right.
And all those wonderful songs. But
So
of
it needs
course-
to be in a smaller venue, and I mean, I didn't
Yes.
see it was.
Well, unless you've got Barbara Streisand in it, and then you could fill the Wembley Arena. But that's not the point, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a musical.
So that's yes. I mean, and so Curtains, of course, is a great legacy. Now that was the show that John Kander died during it.
Ebb died.
Ebb died. Sorry,
just before it went on.
Yes.
I mean, Kander's wonderful. He's over 90 now, and he's still writing.
I know, and I've just declared that he was dead. You didn't hear it here. He's not dead. He's
No,
still
that's
right.
I mean, the other. I'm thinking of other ones. You see that I wonder about. I think
Talking about the Happy Time.
yes. Well,
So
what?
I know the
Sorry.
film, of course, which was a great film. And then, how did I come across that? I remember coming across the Happy Time when. Do you remember Melody Radio?
Yes.
And they used to do between 6 and 7. It was wonderful. They would play an entire cast recording on Melody Radio, and I used to record these off the radio, and that's how I started to get my knowledge of just these bizarre and obscure shows that at the time you couldn't get recordings of because they were all just on LP. And that's when I first came across the Happy Time. And again, that has a score which I think has these wonderful numbers. It seems a very short score. It seems to be...
Yes,
whenever I listen to it, I go, oh, it's over?
It is quite a short score.
There's not very many songs in it. But all the songs, again, have and it actually has the song, and it doesn't matter how many times I listen to it, and it's terribly sentimental. It makes me weep every time, and that is the song sung by the nephew to his uncle, and that one moment.
I have to tell you,
yeah.
this is another one of my forgotten musicals rediscovered.
Yeah.
Because it's just sometimes serendipitous. I happened to be in Washington, because my sister lives in Washington, D.C., at the time when Eric Schaefer, in that Signature Theatre in Virginia, just outside Washington,
Yes.
were reviving 2 Kander and Ebb shows, or 3, I think. But I caught 2 of them. They revived Kiss of the Spider Woman,
Yes.
which in a production that didn't compare with the original, which of course I had seen a few times,
Yes.
the Hell Prince one. But what was a revelation was they revived the Happy Time, which I don't think has ever been revived,
No.
except perhaps by schools and amateur productions. And it was, I thought, why is this musical not treated? It has been rewritten by Kander and Ebb.
Okay.
But I thought, this is brilliant. It's simple, it's small scale, and all the things that might seem sentimental on listening to the CD work on stage, because on stage the story of this uncle who's lying to everybody,
Yeah.
who actually has no real self-esteem and is puffing himself up, and therefore has distorted what actually happened, and his memories are therefore all, to some extent, lies.
Yes.
It's tough enough in terms of what it's really saying about somebody who's a liar,
Yes.
And somebody who's a fantasist. So that when you get these moments of genuine emotion, like the nephew who really believes in the uncle,
Yes.
it's devastatingly emotional and not sentimental.
That's brilliant.
And again, that's where I think that you see Kander and Ebb. I think, for example, the song "Dear One" in "Kiss of the Spider Woman."
Yes.
I cry at that because
Yes.
you've got the girlfriend of the straight guy, the mother of the gay guy, the two men, all in their separate corners of the stage, as it were, singing a quartet, which is very simple, but in context profoundly moving. It is actually the whole humanity of that show, that these people have to pretend that their son and lover, in this case, are not, being tortured,
Yeah.
when in fact they are, and the power of memory and nostalgia, that actually the men are kept alive by the memory of their loved ones.
Yes, yes.
And the equation that the homosexual guy's love for his mother can be equated to the straight guy's love for his girlfriend. It is, in the context of that show, overwhelming, because it's the first time when we realise that there is no difference, in a sense, between the gay guy and the heterosexual political guy. Because remember, the political guy has been very prejudiced
Yes.
and homophobic, and at a certain point he realises that's rubbish.
Yes.
We're all people, and that's it. And so it's about love, and I just find it overwhelming. And I think, tough. I cry because I don't cry very often, but I cry in the theatre sometimes. And I
Yes.
think if I'm crying in the theatre, it means this has got under my intellectual, rational radar.
Yes.
And there's got to be quite a lot to do that.
Yes, indeed, yeah. And to have that little trigger that just turns it on, it just means that it's brilliantly well written. I mean, that the moment in the nephew's song is, I've listened to it so many times, and it's just that the setup for. If you don't know the song, it's called. I think it's called "Stay." I think it's called "Stay."
Please stay.
Please stay. And it is one of those ones that I defy anyone to not, even if they don't weep, to not be moved or to get that little chill.
There's another amazing song, I think, in that called "Seeing Things."
Oh yes,
The
yes.
lyric is absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely, and it's the woman singing to him, or
Both,
he's singing to the woman. They're singing together,
I think it's a duet, yeah.
and they're saying, she's actually sees through him.
Yes,
she realizes
yes.
that she's the only person who actually knows that he is a fantasist and a liar,
yes.
and he's acknowledging that she knows that he's a fantasist as well. So it's it's very
Now,
clever.
there's one other show we simply have to talk about, and Nick's
Yes.
probably going to cut this bit out. I must, because I think it is a brilliant score and a very undervalued musical, and that's The Rink.
Yes, I
mean-
saw the London production when I was very young,
brilliant.
with Josephine Blake and
Diane Langton, who I used to
Yes,
love as a performer.
yes.
But I don't think it could have compared with Liza Minnelli and Chita Rivera.
No.
I mean, they must have. I mean, I think that album is Liza Minnelli vocally at her best. I mean, she's incredibly powerful
Yes.
in that album. So is Chita, actually.
Yeah.
I think the reason for that, again, was a bit like the Bacall factor, because people said that the minute Liza Minnelli left the show,
Yes.
the audience started dropping off. Stockard Channing, funnily enough, took over from Liza, but she couldn't bring in enough of an audience
No.
for them to want to go on. And I think that show was distorted because by that time people wanted to see Liza being Liza and not a character. And she did it. She
Yes.
said, I want to do this rather than make a film or something this time,
Yeah.
because I want to show them that I'm an actress.
Yes.
And you do see that in the piece, and I've seen just excerpts from it and listened to the score. But both Liza and Chita, in their different ways, are absolutely astonishing. And I think there is not one song that isn't a hit in that show,
Yeah.
if you do it properly. I think the other reason why it failed, it was the time, it was 84, and the time when Lloyd Webber and Bubel and Schoenberg had conquered London and Broadway.
Right.
So this show must have looked like a throwback because it's an old-fashioned book musical with a stunning score. But if you look at it now, and I've seen it also, so I didn't see it in that original production in London, but I saw it later at the Orange Tree in a tiny pared-down production, and it came across absolutely brilliantly as a coherent book musical.
Yes.
And I don't know why people. I think it was because it flopped with Diane Langton.
Well,
and Josephine Blake.
I mean, I saw it and it was rattling. I mean, the audience, it was empty in the stalls, and it was the Cambridge, and it was quite a big show. I was quite young. very strangely enough, and it's always weird because I link it, and he sadly died, but there was a young actor called Dursley McLinden. And I remember he was watching it in the audience because he passed me at the back of and I went, oh, that's Dursley McLinden. He sadly died a few years later. I don't know why I tagged that in, but anyway. But I loved it, and I knew nothing about it. I really did not know very much about musicals at the time. And I came out and I was singing plenty of the songs for weeks.
Chief Cook and Bottle Washer.
Chief Cook and the one about Blue Diamonds.
Absolutely.
I remember going down and
yes,
talking.
Wonderful, almost operatic, actually.
And it's very strange because you have this bleakness to it. And it's very clever because you're rooting all the way through. You're rooting for you change, but you're rooting for the daughter to save the Rink, the Rink.
Yes.
And when it finally comes to that fine moment, you're like, oh, thank God they got rid of it.
Yes.
It's quite incredible how they do that change of it. But I can imagine in a smaller version it would have been.
But it's a great mother-daughter, story.
Yes.
And brilliantly done. And every song makes its point. And I'm thinking the other one that's great is the Coloured Lights song that Liza sings.
Yes.
Which is about the Rink.
Yes. Yeah, because that sets it up. And then the duet, the great comedy.
The apple doesn't fall very far
the
from
other
the tree.
one when they're having the argument.
Armagh.
Don't Armagh me.
Yes.
Strangely enough, and this is what something when you mentioned Stockard Channing, I thought how wonderful she'd probably be as the mother now.
Yes.
Actually, she'd be perfect as that.
Well, ironically, wouldn't Liza be good as the mother now?
Oh yes, indeed, yes.
If we can get her out of retirement in Los Angeles,
exactly. Well, actually, you could have Cheetah and Liza back again.
Back again, yeah. The older version.
It could be yes.
No, but it would be great. I mean, it's something. I mean, again, if you had someone like Liza as the mother, and you had a hot young musical, a movie star who could really sing, even someone, say Beyonce, but someone like that who might still bring in an audience.
Yes,
you might sell that.
Yeah, exactly.
But producers, alas, are not very imaginative in Hollywood.
Yeah, but The Rink is a show that it could easily be done. I mean, it's one that you actually could do it in a situ. If you actually found an old roller skating rink, you actually could do it in a rink, which would be perfect.
Absolutely.
And it's not really a particularly big show. I mean, it did strike me that it rattled a bit at the Cambridge. So you could do it in a very small venue.
And
it's not a big cast either.
It was perfect at the Orange Tree, which is tiny.
Yeah.
You never worried. But on the other hand, if you did do a big production, it's a roller skate show that's much better than Starlight Express.
Yes. Oh, it would suit the Bridewell quite well, actually.
Yeah.
The Bridewell, obviously being an old swimming pool, that would be.
Anyway, you will have to be in that one too.
Yes, well, we'll work on that one. I can play one of the coloured lights.
We've all done that.
Well, we'll quickly mention before we wrap up the act, which was written as a vehicle purely for. And we've got Flora the Red Menace, who actually I'm going to skip to Flora the Red Menace quite quickly because someone showed me on the internet a scene of Liza from Flora in the Red Menace, and she was singing Sing Happy. And I'd never seen the footage before. And I have to admit, I've never really been a big Liza fan. I know that's kind of sacrilege to say.
Especially Kander and Ebb fan.
Yes, I know. But when I saw this, I suddenly realised how and why Liza was and became Liza.
Star,
This was something phenomenal. I have never seen anything like it. And to watch someone who was a star and see her when she was younger without the affectations that she grew when she was later.
Absolutely.
And this scene just made me see Flora the Red Menace in another light. Now, of course, then they went on to write the act as a vehicle for
her. I think this is very interesting. I think you get to the nub of two problems, one about Liza's career and one about Kander and Ebb and Liza, because of course they're intertwined completely. Yes. Because Kander and Ebb wanted her for that role right from the beginning, because they already knew her. Ebb did, I think, and there was no question. I mean, they there's a funny story that they said to George Abbott, who was directing it. By that time, he was 91 or something, and still young.
Yes, still young.
He later directed something.
He still had another 50 years to go on.
And the story is that they desperately, you've got to see Liza Minnelli, and he said, I don't want Judy Garland's daughter. She's wrong. And as she came on to do the audition, he said in a very loud voice, "Well, this is a mistake." And apparently by the end of the whatever she did, he said, "We want her." And apparently he completely fell in love with her what during rehearsal. And then they couldn't stop. They said, "No, you can't keep building up this role. I mean, it's going to distort
He went
the
the
whole
other way
show."
round.
He went the other way round.
How funny.
And the interesting thing about that, and I think this is the story, it's how badly Minnelli was used, and in a sense allowed herself, I think, to be. She's a great singing actress. She has to be given something to act.
Yes.
If she's not giving something to act, she says, "I'm Liza and I'm so happy," and I'm just
She becomes a caricature of herself.
She starts doing shtick, you see,
Yes.
which is her Liza shtick.
Yeah.
Which was also fueled, I think, by Fred Ebb. I mean, that's what Kander says, that Ebb was so enamoured of her that he almost channeled his own desire to be a camp Broadway star into Liza, and he wrote material even for her, that the Liza with a Z, that would allow her to be this kind of figure.
Right.
When in fact, I can take it, but too much of it is risible.
Yes, yes.
Because I always say when I'm feeling good, I say, "I'm so happy," and I think, yeah, that's just the prelude to Liza's next breakdown, But I mean that's the persona. But you hear her singing an Aznavour song,
Yes.
"What Makes a Man a Man,"
Yes.
and you see it on stage.
Yeah.
It's pure
Yes,
acting.
yeah, absolutely.
And she uses, like Rivera, she has an ability to use the voice for drama.
Yes.
And it's devastating.
Yeah.
She's always at her worst when she's trying to be whoever this Liza with a Z is, who doesn't really exist. It's not showing her talent.
Yes.
And I suspect that the trouble with the act, I mean, she is technically stunning. If you ever see bits of the act, the one thing you can see on YouTube is her doing City Lights.
Right, yes, yes.
They've staged a whole number, all in those different colours.
Yes.
And, nobody in 1979 could take a big Broadway number and sing and dance at the same time without it being pre-recorded.
Yeah.
The way she did. She had the most amazing energy. She could belt in an amazing way, and she's simply a pure Broadway star. But, of course, you can't sustain a whole show like that. I think what happened with that show is because they were writing for her, they indulged themselves and her in the mannerisms.
Right.
And I think the idea for it is very interesting. I've read the book.
Yes.
It doesn't work, but it's a fascinating, because what Ebb said, it would be the other way. Instead of having a show where you look at the backstage life of the performer while she's on stage in Las Vegas,
Yes.
they would actually have a show which was set backstage, and you'd see how the on-stage life is sort of betraying it or reflecting it.
Ah,
They
yes,
wanted to
okay.
do it in a sort of
Yes.
opposite Pirandello way, so that what you assumed would be the reality actually is the less important part, and what you assume. And I don't think it quite works. I think it could. It's a brilliant idea, and I think sometimes what they wrote was a one-woman show for Liza,
Yes,
basically,
yes.
and the critics saw that, and so she got the Tony. Everyone said it was the best performance for years, and they said the show was awful.
Yeah.
So it's a real paradox that you can write a show, and actually the score is good, but
Yes,
there's too
it is,
many,
yes.
too many songs for Liza to show her virtuosity at that point.
Right, yes. So it's a victim of his own success in
a way. It's a
composition
victim of
as well.
her success,
Yes.
in a way. And it only ran, I mean, again, they knew the minute she walked out of it, it would not run.
Yes,
They closed
yes,
it. And
yeah.
so it ran 6 months on Broadway. It could have run 6 years with her in it.
Yes.
But without her, it wouldn't run.
Yes. Very strange. Well, it's wonderful. I think we've gone from Z to A. we actually have done it.
Absolutely.
Yes, we
I'm
studied
Robert with
Zorba.
an R, by the way.
Yeah, that's very funny. I've just realised we did end on an A,
Well,
which was quite good.
I must tell you something, Dom.
Yeah.
I have made a real soulmate. Just this interview, I don't know whether Nick had this in mind. I'd probably not, because he doesn't make matches. But I've been so stimulated by your take on this, and I feel all the time snap. All the points that you've raised are things I've been thinking for years.
Likewise, yes.
And everyone thinks I'm nuts because they don't love Kander and Ebb quite as much as I do. But of course, because I'm having to research it, I've explored the highways and byways.
Yes, yes, indeed.
And we haven't even talked about cabaret, but who needs to? Everyone knows about cabaret.
Exactly,
Everyone
yes.
knows about Chicago.
Yes, Chicago. Which weird. I mean, I remember when I was starting out, and no one had heard of Chicago. And in fact, and someone said to me, sing All I Care About Is Love for an audition song. And no, it was so obscure you couldn't buy the record. Absolutely. It was when there wasn't CDs at that point, and you could go into Dress Circle and buy the record for about £70.
That when I came across it really as a student, when when it opened in the same month, I think, as Chorus Line, or the same year, certainly, as Chorus Line, 1975. And I remember getting both of the albums, and I thought Chorus Line, because it's got a great score by Hamlish. I don't like the show so much, but I remember thinking, this show's got to be brilliant.
Yes.
It's got to. And it's interesting that now, as time goes by, the revival of Chicago will have run longer than the longest running American musical, which is Chorus Line. And it is still running, and it probably will run a lot longer. And I think that's poetic justice, because in the end, when you look at the two shows, Chorus Line is great in many ways, but it's now dated and very soft-centered.
Yes.
Chicago has absolutely... It has a heart of steel, not
Yes.
gold, but steel.
Yeah.
And I think that it's been recognised over the years, that we can now appreciate what seemed cynical in those days.
Absolutely. And it's I adore Chicago. So, and it's I agree. I would always tend to go towards that than the Chorus Line. Absolutely. Really. So
maybe we should just end with all that jazz.
Indeed, yeah. Well, likewise, Robert. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you, because it's nice to talk to someone that if we know we're on the same wavelength, and we both know the shows.
Well,
I
feel that normally people think I'm some kind of strange nutter.
Oh, well, me too.
But you and I have agreed on almost everything we've talked about today.
Indeed.
So we must both be nutters.
Yes, exactly. Well, I look forward to talking to you about the Great British Musical sometime. We'll revisit all the wonders of Henniker and
then anybody who listens to this will know that we really are mad.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Well, thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
He's still alive. He's sat in the corner.
I think he's fallen asleep.
He is.
Hung myself.
Yeah. Now, Nick, we're going to do a test on you now, so a written test. So anyway, I'm passing you. So thank you very much, Robert. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dom.
And yes, and so from Musical Talk, this is goodbye for me and goodbye for you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
This rather wonderful episode of Musical Talk was presented by Dominic McChesney and Robert Gordon. For more information, visit musicaltalk.co.uk and follow us on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. Copyright Musical Talk 2017.